We leave our house that we're working on in the Willamette Valley and make the short drive down to Brooks, which is only about 6 miles, and we're going to take a few hours off and go to the antique power land where they're supposedly going to thrash some grain today. So we're looking forward to seeing this, and it's done with the old-fashioned steam power and the old-fashioned thrash machine. So that sounds like a good one to go to. And here we are. And they're having a big steam up there, and thousands of people are going to it. So we're going to go there too, and we park in a big field, and then we wait in line to go into the admissions and pay a small fee, and then we go, and you hear steam engines, the whistles blowing, and you can hear the clatter of the steam engines as they go, and they've got a whole bunch of equipment all fired up and going. Some of these they're using diesel fuel to fire them, and a lot of the bigger engines are using wood. I never realized there were so many steam engines still around. I don't know where they got them all, but boy, there's a bunch of them, and they've got them fired up and running, so you can hear the noise of them running, and see the smoke coming out of them and the steam releasing, and even hear some of their steam whistles blowing occasionally. The balls up on top of the steam engine are the governor, and they regulate the speed of it, and when they're in close like this, it means the engine is just idle, and when they swing way out, that means the engine's going a lot faster. And there's always steam and water pouring out of these machines, and they constantly have to keep putting more water in them as they chug away. These machines are big and huge. Just the big old iron wheels on them weigh a lot. And then
Hammer, like Dad had. He always kept his in a shed.
yeah,
So we called it a tractor shed because he always kept it in a tractor shed.
these steam engines were huge and heavy, but that was the best technology of the time. It was either that or use horses. It's amazing that they got some of these really old antiques running. It seemed like a lot of them were made around 1913, and probably even some before that, but they're here and running real good. I suppose they had to go completely through them. It probably cost thousands and took lots of time. These machines, it would be a job just moving them from one place to another because they're so huge and so heavy. But I don't remember these at all when I was a kid. There were a few tractors in the community where I was raised, but most everyone just used horses in the early 1940s where my first memories were made. But I remember the old gasoline internal combustion engines in the old tractors with iron wheels at that time. But we never had a tractor on our ranch till about the mid-1940s. Everything was done with horses before that, except when they'd thrash, and then they'd have an old gasoline engine run the thrash machine. But here, they're running steam engines to thrash with. So that's a really interesting treat to be able to see these old engines from the past running and actually thrashing some grain. The steam engines had been to our ranch before I was born though, and we could find some of the ash they dumped out of the boilers in piles out in the field, but I never got to see them. And then there's the old World War II Jeeps, several of them here with old military equipment. And here comes a really neat old steam engine chugging along, and they move slow but sure. It looks as if it took two men to run them. Maybe one man run the brakes and the gears, while the other would steer, and then the one that run the brakes and the gears probably would stoke it up with wood when needed. But maybe they just had two men here because there's such a crowd that they need someone on the brake and the gears all the time. Maybe out in the open field one man could run it. But it's quite a job steering these things. Since they're so heavy, the steering's geared real low. So the driver, or the steerer, has to turn the steering wheel multiple times just to make a short turn. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to turn it if it were geared faster. There's even a very nice display of old antique military equipment here that would have gone to war. A lot of this is like the World War II vintage stuff, and maybe some of it's World War I. I don't really remember seeing any World War I stuff, but a lot of World War II stuff here. And so that's interesting for the military buffs anyway. There's a huge display of steam engines of all sizes and colors and shapes, and they all have one thing in common: they chug along at a real slow pace, but they get there, and they wouldn't tire like a horse. And besides, you could pull a lot of equipment behind them. They didn't have a whole lot of horsepower, but they would be able to do some good plowing and other things. In the area where I lived, they said those big steam engines came in there and plowed land that should have never been plowed. And even in the 1950s, they were still, where it had killed the native grasses, they were still trying to get grass to grow back where it had been plowed. Looks like it.
There's one over there.
The balls are swinging out just slightly farther than sometimes. That means he's going just a little faster than an idle. The thing with the steam engines, if you want them to really go, you would holler in a real hearty voice to get above all the sound. You would holler balls out, and that means the balls would go out, opening the governor up, where the engine would run a lot faster. They even had an old steam-powered crosscut saw for sawing wood, and even an old sawmill there for sawing lumber. Then we walk around and take a look at tractors of all sizes and shapes. Now it's time to stoke up the old steam engines and start the thrashing of some grain they grew here on the property. The first machine we see is the old hay baler, fired with a big steam engine and then a great big long belt. The thing you see standing up on the hay baler was the thing that tucked the hay in, and on our ranch in Montana there was an old hay baler like that set down along the fence. I guess it sat there till it rusted away. So I asked my dad the story on it, and he said there was an old man he hired to bale some hay, and he was tucking the hay down in the hay baler with his leg. He got his leg cut, and it cut his leg clear off, so he had to use a peg leg from then on, and the old hay baler sat there, I guess, till it rusted away. This wagon is called the Bundle Wagon, and they have what they call a binder that goes out and ties little bunches of grain together, and then you stand them up, several of them together, and they call that a shock. And then after it's dried sufficiently, they have guys go out there with pitchforks and load these on the bundle wagon, and they haul them in, and then you fork the bundles into the thrash machine with the heads of the grain first, and it beats it and blows it and gets the grain out of it, and with a bunch of little beaters inside, and then there's blowers that blow the chaff out of it, and you end up with wheat. And I remember my folks used to have wheat grain thrashed, and then they'd take it to a little mill near where we live and have it ground into flour to use to cook with. And my grandma was always one for, oh my goodness, you must have a slice of bread with every meal. And that old bread that was ground like that, whole wheat bread, and it was ground kind of coarse, and that was pretty hard stuff to swallow, but I guess we did well on it. They'll thrash out a little pile of straw here, and then he'll fire up the baler and bale it up to haul it out of there. The spout is adjustable, so what we did on our ranch, we never baled the straw. We just piled it in huge straw piles, and then in the winter we could go out with a wagon, load a bunch of this on the wagon, and haul it in, and the cattle would eat a little bit of it, not too much of it, but then it would serve well for those cold Montana nights for them to lay on. We'd usually try to put it in the cottonwood trees where there's a little protection. Now the guys are loading the bundles into the thrash machine, always going head first with the bundles of wheat, and the old belt has the twist in it. When you twist the belt like that, it makes it run the opposite direction. And these belts originally were made of horsehide, but then later they were replaced with cotton. And the rancher that owned the thrash machine and usually the tractor, his only job was to watch the tractor and the thrash machine that something didn't happen to it, and then the rest of the crew would shovel the bundles of grain into it, and watch the grain that it didn't plug in the thrash machine, and also that it didn't get too full, and then they would use an auger, or sometimes they just loaded it directly into a truck off the thrash machine. But some of the thrashing machine guys would, at times when everything was running smooth, they would help shovel the bundles into the machine just to be helpful and to get the job done. My memories of the thrashing was you would start as soon as it was light enough in the morning you could see, and you would thrash till noon, and then you would shut down at noon, and usually the rancher's wife had a big feast prepared for you, and so you would go to the house, eat for about an hour, and then back out to thrash again. And sometimes the job would take a few days. Other smaller operators it would take a month. So the cotton belts would be the ones you see running here, and they were quite heavy, and there was tar worked in with them somehow, so they'd last really good. And the old steam engine puts away, and turning the thrash machine to give it the power. The thrash machine, of course, has no engine on it of any kind. They rely on some kind of an engine independent of the machine. But my memories go back to a gasoline tractor running the thrash machines. This was before my time. They used the steam engines on them. And anyway, the gasoline tractor did a good job with it too, just as well as the steam engine. But the steam engines were first. I think you'd have to keep a pretty close eye on the steam machine just to see that your pressures, the steam pressure is okay, and that you don't get a bunch of pressure building up and cause it to blow up. And they have a stack of wood right on the machine that they carry with them, and then as needed you stoke it up again. These machines run for hours and hours at that steady chug pace, and they've got the governor open a little bit here, but by no means is it full open, and so it's just chugging away, giving enough power to do the job they need to do. In our community, there'd be one thrash machine that some rancher owned, and he'd take it around and thrash at different other ranches with it. And anyway, it'd take quite a crew to do the thrashing. So all the neighbors would gang up and go together and do the thrashing first on one place, and then they'd move to another place. And everyone looked forward to this. It was sort of a social event. And there would be the cook that would cook all kinds of good things, oodles of pies for dessert, and homemade bread, and just roast beef, and all sorts of different things for the thrashing crew. And the guys would go in, and you had a hand pump. You pumped the water, and they'd wash up, get some of this wheat chaff or oat chaff or whatever they're thrashing off from them. And they'd sit down to the table, and wow, did they eat lots of potatoes and lots of roast beef, and then a vegetable or two, whatever happened to be in season, probably what you would use, unless they opened a can of home canned beans or peas or something. And what a feast, and what a great get together it was. But now none of that happened. Hour after hour, the old thrashing machine belches out the straw, which is basically a waste product, but could be used around the ranch and definitely never went to waste. One year we had an especially big straw pile, and everyone in the community ran out of straw that winter, ran out of hay that winter, so they'd come and get this straw, and the cattle would eat it basically as a filler, and then they'd feed them grain, and some would buy what they called cottonseed cake. It was a mixture of grains and molasses and a very good feed, and they'd feed that to the cattle with the straw, and they made it through the winter really good. Had it not been for that straw pile, and my dad just opened it up, anyone that wanted some straw was welcome to get it, and there was no charge. In the upper center, this is the hay baler, and in the upper center you see this thing that comes down. It's sort of a plunger, and that's what the old man got his leg cut off with at that time. It must have been a community tragedy because it was a very close community and everyone helped everyone else. And so when someone had an accident like that, it was a real disaster. They are standing by, waiting to bale the straw till a little bit later. They're going to thrash some first. The thrash machine doesn't thrash it as fast as the baler bales it, so they'll let some build up, and then they'll get out there with pitchforks and pitch it in the old stationary baler. You could sure tell where the action was. You'd see that smoke billowing skyward from those big, powerful old steam engines as they continued to pitch bales into the thrash machine. Technology was great, but there were this was great times had at thrashing and different community get-togethers where the community was very close at that time, where now not so much. The machine ahead of us, what they call a binder, and that cuts the grain. It cuts the grain off and it runs it through, ties a string around each little bundle, and then spits it out. And usually the kids, if a kid wanted to earn a little money in the summertime, they'd go out and shock grain. They'd grab a few of these bundles and stand them up so the heads were up in the air and they'd dry good. And this is where the bundles of what they called binder twine went. And you can see the binder twine going out of it and back into the spot where it was tied. They still have a little bit of wheat in the machine, and when they get ready to cut some more, there'll be more of it come through there. Then we're going to walk around and go see if we can see the old steam-powered sawmill fired up and running. We see a display of antique Caterpillar tractors, and they're tractors of every size and shape here. All powerful old machines that made a difference in our country. The Caterpillar tractors built roads and dams and did everything necessary. They helped build cities and country landscapes as well, and so they were very important in shaping our country to where we see it now. And then there's little tractors of all sizes and shapes here that the small farmers would have one of, even if it was just to plow the garden. There's an old farmall, and I remember seeing one of those. I've ridden on one of those quite a bit, and it had old iron wheels. But Marge is hungry now, so she needs to go get some homemade ice cream from a little stand here where they give you a little cup of homemade ice cream, which it's been a while since I've had homemade ice cream. I guess we're going to have to get busy and make some, but Marge couldn't resist that. It seems like that ice cream hit the spot for a nice hot day when you're hungry and thirsty after walking around and seeing all this wonderful old antique equipment. We now see a bunch of diesel smoke bellowing out of a shed, So we're going to have to go investigate and see what it is. We get over there and almost instantly I see what I was really looking for. It's an old Atlas Marine diesel. And I remember seeing one of those when I was working on a commercial trawler offshore. An old man and an old woman had a boat, and they'd been out for a 10-day trip, and they came in to sell their fish and rest a little, and I saw the old diesel. But the old fishing boat, the Kilchas, had one, and that's one of the boat wreck that's on my side. We're extremely fortunate that somebody had the thought to preserve some of this old antique equipment so the younger generation can see what it is. And if we keep a close eye on history, history kind of repeats itself, and we can see where we've been and figure out where we're going next. The old steam-powered sawmills were very important too, but we didn't get here in time to watch this one run, and I wish I had been here in time to see it run. But anyway, we can see the lumber they've sawed, and this was a very important thing for the early pioneers to build their houses and cabins, and lumber for everything was cut here and out of darn good material, and those old steam mills did one excellent job sawing this rough lumber. And there's the big old saw that goes winding through those logs and sawing them from logs to lumber. And I wish I'd have been here to see that happen. But I didn't make it, and we were doing other things and didn't make it there in time to see it run. Maybe another time we can do that. And here comes an old tractor. I think this is an internal combustion tractor because there's no big smokestack and no smoke coming out of it. But it looks like that's woman's work driving this tractor, and there's a young woman driving it, and it looks like it's probably easier to run than a steam engine. And then big trucks coming around putting water on the roads to keep them from getting so darn dusty with everyone here. Even an old crawler tractor crawling his way up the just freshly watered road without making a whole bunch of dust. I can say I really enjoyed this equipment, but this is the